Rod. So we detected actually in our pre-discussion that diversity programs are as diverse as the suppliers that they are embracing. And there is no one-size-fits-all approach, but global supplier diversity programs need to be glocalized, which means locally adapted to regional and country specifics. So therefore, we are happy to have you with us, Rod, and with you also the perspective maybe more on an US base. So yes, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Astrid. And I'll just give you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, just to provide a little bit of perspective on supplier diversity in the US and its roots. We can move on to the next slide. Really, the supplier diversity movement in the US was an outgrowth of the civil rights movement. It began in the late 60s. And this culminated in the creation of what's called the Minority Business Development Agency, or MBDA. Soon after the MBDA was created to really advance, and it was really all about, obviously, economic growth, economic impact. And the MBDA was followed by certification and advocacy organizations, such as the NMSDC, WeBank, which are the largest national certification and advocacy organizations in the US. But they are only a few of many, as you'll see in some of the subsequent slides. This history sort of this timeline really followed to 1978. I think that's probably the next significant moment in time, which marked the creation of the SBA. And that was really the Small Business Act. And this was really to broaden the definition included to include socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. So it was not just about ethnic minority businesses, but then the government said, hey, at the end of the day, it's underrepresented businesses, and those are the businesses that are left out that can really fuel growth. So it was really all about maximizing the talent, right? I mean, I think that's what we even see today. At the end of the day, as Mike will probably talk about, some of the work he's doing in Europe around supplier diversity. So moving on, the Small Business Act required any contractor for the federal government to have a supplier diversity program. And so as you can see on this next slide, if you think about the Fortune 500 companies in the US, you'd probably be hard pressed to find any Fortune 500 company that does not have a contract of some type with the federal government. Well, if that's the case, if you have a contract with the federal government, you are required to have a supplier diversity program or small business contracting program. And those requirements are typically pushed downstream to your prime suppliers. And that's really that was a catalyst for the key catalyst that drove the growth of supplier diversity programs in corporate America as we know them today. Move on to the next slide. So while government mandates really created the catalyst for supplier diversity, leading companies now view it as a strategic imperative for all of the benefits that it provides. And I like this slide because it really brings home the significance of small and diverse businesses, the fact that they create so much of the jobs growth, yet account for so little of the revenue. I think that is that's really the formula that we're all trying to impact, right? We're trying to drive more opportunities towards small business because they're really the creators of jobs. And this really holds in pretty much any society. And so I'd like to really share that to show the importance of this movement. The next slide really illustrates, another driver or just another example of why, of how this is so important. We have the $1 Billion Roundtable, which organizations that are celebrated, for spending annually more than $1 billion with diverse businesses. And, many corporations are, particularly the Fortune 500 level, are really striving to become members of this organization. And it's really a badge of honor. While spend is not the only metric, it is definitely one of those that has the potential to attract the attention of the market and draw people to it. So I think this is just another example of how much of an imperative this has become and a board level topic has become in the U.S. So moving to the next slide, this is a sampling of the federal, state, and national certifications. I call it certification soup. You know, most states have their own certifications, but what I wanted to do is highlight here just the complexity surrounding it. And I think you'll notice, like, in different markets around the US, one of the reasons that we have all these various classifications is really because it started out as, you know, sort of government mandated. And so it makes it a little bit easier for us to track, and validate vendors based on their classification. And it's really because we have sort of the government really being the catalyst, and that really drove the creation of organizations to verify and validate the actual status of these suppliers. So these are probably the most recognized classifications that are tracked in the US. There are many more, but I just wanted to highlight some of these for you. Move on. In my experience, really, you look at these 8 areas. These are the 8 really capabilities that are required for a company to be successful. These are, sort of the 8 areas where leading supplier diversity programs and initiatives, where I see them most successful. And it really starts with executive sponsorship and support. And that really doesn't change regardless of where you're in the world. It really has to come from the top, because that's going to help to drive, obviously the setting of goals and metrics and accountability, and really just having policies and practices that really foster an inclusive procurement environment. The organizations where I've seen this most successful is organizations that ultimately supplier diversity becomes an integral part of sourcing strategy. So if you move on to the next slide, one of the things I wanted to highlight as well is that companies really, leading supplier diversity programs have, really 4 key questions that they want to ask, or capabilities to really drive and manage the program on an ongoing basis. It's the ability to identify suppliers currently in the supply chain. Number 2, the ability to discover new diverse suppliers, and that's being associated with organizations like this organization, actually SPP, organizations like the MSD UK and MSDC. 3, the ability to track second-tier diverse spend, because not only are you tracking the spending and holding your suppliers accountable, this is also a way to gain access to next generation suppliers that may be able to be demurrage suppliers.
The settings for your account.
Number 4, and finally, the ability to report results, internally and externally. Next slide. While there are many underlying metrics, spend, as I mentioned before, is typically the primary metric, but leading companies are really moving beyond just the transactions themselves. Companies are starting to actually collect from their suppliers, diversity employment data, really wanting to understand beyond what the diversity spending is. They want to know the diverse jobs they're impacted. In other words, how many underrepresented populations and employees, are you hiring? And so it's really interesting to see how this has really has broadened from just tracking spend to tracking other things like, sort of I call it the 360 diversity view. And with that, I'll turn it back to Astrid. Hopefully this was a great, take some actions away from this and help you have a better understanding of supplier diversity from a US perspective. Astrid, back to you.
Super. Thanks a lot, Rod. And I'm sure we have to squeeze all the information into very limited time slots. So I'm sure that there are some questions that you triggered now with your part. So thanks a lot for sharing this. I would hand over to you, Jaime, because also in the pre-discussions that we had, we found that so supplier diversity programs are as diverse as it sounds, and you will shed some light on social procurement more and social enterprises. Over to you.
Thank you, Astrid. Also from my side, welcome everybody, and thank you for your time. More than anything, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm always amazed when I hear about the maturity of, I think it's supplier diversity in the US. If I compare to Europe, It's a huge gap, I think, in terms of governance, reporting, structure overall. If you consider the UK, which is arguably the most developed country in that sense across Europe, the Social Value Act is just celebrating 10 years this year. It was, I think, it passed in 2012 and it became effective in January 2013. So it's not even that, if you want. So we're talking about 10 years in the UK, 30 plus years in the US. And other than that, it's very much greenfield, I guess, in many other countries. So what I wanted to do in this short period of time today is perhaps to drive your attention to something that perhaps you can use if you're not based in the US, if you're not based in the UK as well. And as Astrid mentioned, social procurement is another, I think that possibility for you to not only raise the diversity of your supply base, but also then repurpose that money if you want to do what some call responsible business or do business for good. I mean, depending on who you ask, you might hear different definitions of it. So what is perhaps a social enterprise or social business? These are companies that are profit driven, but they have a social or environmental mission behind it. So they reinvest a significant part of their profits into their missions. Yeah, and what I was, I think that I'm preparing for the session was a set of statistics here that I took from the Social Enterprise UK report from last year that will show exactly how social businesses or social enterprises is directly linked to supplier diversity overall. So if you look at some of the stats that I have there, 47% of social enterprises are led by women. Yeah, and in these companies, 61% or over 60% of the workforce is female as well. If you compare this to the traditional business, if you want, in both cases, it's far more advanced. If you look into minority communities, 14% of social enterprise are led by people from a minority community background, which is also more than usually you would see on traditional business. Again, UK data here, but I think this is quite representative as well. Yeah, and last point that I would like to address perhaps on disabilities. A third of social enterprises, they do end up providing services or products to their clients with some sort of disabilities. But not only that, we have many social enterprise that their mission is to provide working possibilities also for people with disabilities. So it's not only about the leadership or the ownership, it goes and tackles down into the inclusion of people into the workforce as well. So it's a quite, I think, a powerful message here. And I would like you to take this away to consider how you can embed social enterprises or adopt social procurement in your organization. We're going to have plenty of time, I hope, at the end for Q&A, and I'm really looking forward to your questions already now. So Astrid, back to you.
Super, Jaime. Thanks a lot for sharing this perspective. And I see already in the chat that this is an interesting aspect that you bring. So linking social procurement also to the supplier diversity topic. I think this is not a connect that all of us have immediately. So thanks a lot for sharing this. I hand over to Alex Tarmo from Unilever. She's head of the partnership and social procurement team in Unilever. And I think also you have a story to tell with your program that you launched, I think 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
1 year ago. 1 year ago.
1 year. Okay. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Astrid. Thank everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here and talk about diversity of diverse programs. So I'm going to tell a bit about what we did and how we did that. It's still very young. Indeed, we officially launched a year ago and started to work on it 2 years ago. So I think in people saying just starting, you can be quite fast into that journey. I'm starting with that because I love it. There is not really a video, but that's the commitment we made in January 2021. This is a real person, a real buyer, and we commit to spend 2 billion euro every year with Supplier for more diverse community, which is probably what is helping us to now really move the needle. So I'm going to tell you a bit what. So if we move to the next slide, because everybody of course will say, you know, how do we define a diverse owned businesses, what they mean? And I wanted to start here, building also on what Rod and Jaime said. So when we started, we had to decide what we want to put as a metrics to start with. And recognizing that Unilever was quite late to the journey. You heard US, I mean, we have competitors, peers doing it for 20, 30 years. We wanted to make sure that we were coming with something that will resonate with people around us, with the industry norm, that will help us to really also, you know, benchmark ourselves and get our supplier on board with something new. So we came with the 51%, which I'm sure Mayank and Rod can give you more, but that's what is used today on recognized diverse supplier program, which is starting with a 51% of more own, manage and control by member from an unrepresented group. But we know that the world will probably not stop at 51% at one step. This is a moving thing. We need to continue to think and explore what else beyond 51%, more than 51%. That's why I'm also playing a big role with organizations such as MSD UK that we can really work and continue to evolve. We also clearly had to define what are underrepresented group, and that's why I love working with Jaime, because if you ask me, social enterprise also need to come at one point, and you come, you know, with the definition of the meaning of each word. But we're starting with the underrepresented group because this is really where there is, you know, an urgency to support them, especially as we came, you know, into the program was designed as COVID was coming. So we knew that this community were much more impacted, and business owned by this community were struggling because their big challenge sometimes it's access to cash, and clearly was a big problem. So we defined 4 big key groups, and I'm saying key group only because we are a group of people that you could find in different countries in the world, because we were thinking of designing a global program, and that has been my ongoing love and challenge, that design a global program that we can implement in countries. So women was of course the one that we immediately look at, because women you can really first country. When we look at ethnic and racial minority, where of course has to be adjusted or managed according to the country where we operate. People identifying as LGBTQI+, which of course we are a country, unfortunately, where we can't do that much yet because there is also a lot of restriction, but we are working with organizations on tackling also that challenge. And then the people with disability. But building on what Jaime and my colleague said, we also said, okay, there are different groups existing in different countries. In the US, for example, there is the veteran group. In Australia, there is Aboriginal, and we know that as we go, we will maybe include other groups. And this will include, for example, also migrant workers in Europe. We are thinking already of including social enterprise. So it's not a defined stone, and it will be a moving space to adjust to where we operate. So with that in mind, we created our program, which I can just give you a bit more about how we did that in the next slide. So we commit on the 2 billion, because as Rod said, you need to have a KPI, you need to have a spend. So we said, let's go for 2 billion, which probably it's 6 times what we knew we were doing on diverse businesses, mainly in the US and in South Africa, because my maturity is there. So we had a program in North America for a couple of years and also in South Africa, but nothing else in other countries. So we said, let's go global, let's give ourselves 5 years, and let's aim for a 2 billion, which it's ambitious enough that we can really create something. So to do that, we are having 3 pillars. The first one, most obvious, is that we increase direct spend with our diverse supplier. And to do that, the big thing is to get to know these companies and then connect them with our procurement team and ensure we are inviting them to our sourcing event. There is no willingness to get them into our supply chain just because we are diverse, but we want to invite them that when we know they are a good company, they will win business. So we did that in partnership with many organizations, including MSD UK that you will hear in a minute. We did similar, and we are continuing to expand this group because we are very specific to the market where we operate. So we will not have one partner globally. Some of them are, but some are very specific to the country, so this list will expand. The second pillar, it's really about supplier development program, because we know that we need to support these businesses. Again, I talk about access to cash, number one priority, access to fund to grow, but we're also doing a lot on training, accelerator, mentoring, supporting them on what they need. And to do that, we need to understand what they need, very different by group, by country. So here again, we had to work with company on the ground that will help us to do that, being government agency, bank agency, but also leveraging our big brands and program that already exist, like Sunlight in Kenya. We are also doing it a lot with collaborating with our peers, competitors, because we really believe collaboration is key to drive that. Last but not least, and someone mentioned, is about tier 2. So we are also starting to think about how we get our big partner supplier to also commit for supplier diversity, that we can get more supplier diversity through tier 2. And we launched what we call a partner promise last year, asking all our core partners to sign a promise for ED&I. So far, we have, I think, more than 50 that have said, yes, I do it. And it's very important for us also because honestly, we are late. We need to learn from our suppliers. Some of our suppliers are doing a brilliant job. So we just want to learn from them and drive leverage together. So I'm trying to recap in one slide our journey, because I think many of you, so if you go to the next one, because many of you are like, okay, I want to start, sorry, this one is just to explain to you again that we are going really country by country, and we're really implementing locally. With key market, we started this year, and with an expansion plan for the year to come. I don't think you can do the globe in 1 year. So we have built a plan country by country. Of time. So if I'm on the last slide, I'm just trying to summarize the journey we had so far that will help you how to start. So again, from start to now, it's been 2 years. It's starting really by an engagement I have with Dow. I always say that if someone from Dow today, I will continue to say it was really an event that inspired me. I came back internally and the empowerment from my boss really to say, you know, it looks great, just do it, just develop something, and we will incorporate that into our bigger Compass organization. That I was lucky that we were also building our Compass. We did that. We look at designing it in collaboration. So engage with all your peers, your colleagues, because this is how you will really design your program. We launched in January with an external commitment. It's helping to have an external commitment because you move your team internally. And then we had a full year implementation last year, which led us to our first external reporting this year. And we managed to achieve already 45 million euro in 1 year. So I think you can do it. There is a lot there that you can learn and just replicate, duplicate, steer with pride. And then the next step for us is really to expand to more markets, expand to more portfolio, start reporting tier 2, and land that with our brands and our consumer. And with that, I'm going to put it back to you, Mayank.
Yeah, so Mayank is next, but I'm happy to bridge it because also here I see already while you were talking, Alex, that there's a lot of interest also in the certification bodies and especially also in the UK. And this leads exactly to your part, I guess, Mayank. So thanks again for joining us today. You are the founder and CEO of the Minority Supplier Development in UK, and maybe you can help us to get some transparency on the certification schemes in Europe.
Thank you so much, Astrid, for having me, and great discussion. And I wanted to summarize the certification, although this is such a huge topic and such a diverse topic and such a complicated topic, especially when you focus on ethnic minorities. Every country has a different classification of ethnic minority. Every country has different legal framework of what you can say, what you cannot say, and every country has a different definition. So when we started MSD UK in 2006, we were restricted to following what almost like we started with our journey with following the US definition, which was around majority ownership, management, and control. Now in UK, all our non-white citizens are considered as ethnic minorities, so they come from different backgrounds, and that's definition and as defined by the government. And we followed the US definition of 51% ownership, management, and control by people from those communities. And the differences in America, you have Hispanics, Latinos as the minorities. In UK, we have Black African, Black Caribbean, Asian, which includes Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankans, and other Asians, Chinese, Middle East. So the categories are different, and they all form the whole group of immigrants that have come from former UK colonies where British ruled. But what we also do is look at the citizenship. They need to be citizens of this country, those majority owners. That is very important. And they need to own majority of the share. And that's how we certify minority businesses, ethnic minority businesses. And we have similar organizations in Australia, Canada, South Africa, China that certifies ethnic minorities. But then recently we have launched 2 other levels of certification. As we all know, the way we do business has changed dramatically. And now we are living in a gig economy where a number of young people start on their own, have an idea and start a business. And they are working with corporate supply chain, but there is no way of certifying them because they are self-employed. So we are launching later on this year, in a couple of months' time, the first ever certification for ethnic minority freelancers. And we are going to include all the self-employed people, whether they are photographers, videographers, construction workers, scientists, etc., to be part of that. They need to be taxpayers in the UK. And that's what we are starting to do. The third classification that we are launching is the certification of ethnic minority controlled business, which means that we are allowing minority businesses who are initially formed as a majority owned, managed, and controlled to forego their equity for attracting investment to grow their business, but they still retain the day-to-day management and operation and control of the business by having the voting rights also. And we are going to certify them as an ethnic minority controlled business. That's a 3 certification that we have within the ethnic minority business space. And I think in the world, we are the first organization this offering 3 different certification. But the most important thing that everyone over here needs to be aware of, that there are a lot of challenges when it comes to ethnic minority certification. First of all, as I mentioned, UK is not the US. So the definition changes. If you are starting your US program and extending it globally, every country that you want to go into will have a different definition and legal framework. UK is also, Europe is not the US. We have recently launched our program in 6 European countries: France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Ireland, and Sweden. And each of those countries have a different way of they recognize minorities or people of color. Some recognize them as a migrant. Some don't even recognize them, like in France. So we have to go into each country and seek legal opinion to define how we define those beneficiaries of underrepresented groups. And that is where Europe is also not the US and Europe is not the UK also. But then Europe itself is not alike because Sweden has a different definition to France, to Germany. So when you include ethnic minorities in your program globally, you have to be mindful of definition that would differ country to country, legal framework, political environment, a social environment would differ. In some countries, it's the socially economically disadvantaged groups in the population. So they look at the economic disadvantage to define who are defined as minorities. So this is where complexity increases. But what we are doing at MSD UK is we are trying to be different, and we are thinking outside the box to make sure that by doing so, we are still reaching out to the majority population of those underrepresented groups.
Very good. Yeah, indeed. So I think also in the pre-discussions that we had, and you emphasized on it, Europe is not or UK. Europe is not US, Europe is not UK. So, and this is something that we need to acknowledge, although maybe if we could make a wish, then it would be nice to have such a harmonized approach also across Europe, but we don't. So let's see maybe what times bring, and also the discussion for now. Before we enter the Q&A part of our session, I would like to involve also the participants in a small poll. And this is about also where you are currently on your supplier diversity program. So I launched the poll, and you will see in a second the questions hopefully on screen. We would be curious to learn from you. Do you have already a supplier diversity program in place? And if yes, what kind? Is it more focused on North America, or is it a global program? Are you considering to start a supplier diversity program so soon, or is it not considered yet? Very good. Numbers are slowing down, and it seems that the majority of you are about to start with it. And when we speak about starting, most probably also with a global program, as we learned, this is the challenge that you are now also facing, Alex, right? So how to make a US existing program to a global program, how to transition then also there. So thanks to your questions, or for being involved in this poll. And with this, I'm happy to open, I end the poll, the Q&A. So I saw some exchange on the chat already. Sonia, I don't know if you want to address one question directly.
I got some questions here. So the very first one was from Kate. She was asking what are approved certification bodies in the UK. So I think it's been partially answered, that question. So Kate, unless you still have a question on that one, maybe I'll move on to the next one. There was a question from Mike Viggers. Sorry if I'm not spelling, if I'm not pronouncing your family name properly. He was asking about those companies that allow self-identification of self-validation status of by the suppliers to say they are minority-owned business. How does it work? I mean, do you have views on that, Alex, Jaime, Maya, and Rod? I mean, I know in the US it's a bit different, but how do you manage it if you're a self-certification system, basically? Would you recommend that at all?
If I just respond to that, I think what companies in UK, Europe are doing more and more is trying to do a baselining of their supply base to ask questions about who would identify themselves as a woman-owned or minority-owned, etc., with a definition of what constitutes a minority or woman-owned business. Once they are self-identify themselves, they are trying to introduce them to certifying body like MST UK, like WeConnect, to encourage them to get certified so that they can include the spend with them in their overall supplier diversity spend. So that's the trend that I'm seeing regularly now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's really the same for the US. I mean, many organizations will accept self-certification, or will do their own certification, similar to what Mayank is saying. In fact, one of the trends I'm seeing here is the emergence of additional credible third-party certification organizations that companies are using. I think there's some, we've had some issues, obviously, with COVID and some bottlenecks in terms of getting certifications done and renewed. So that's actually created an opportunity, and I think there are some large companies that are embracing that.
If I may, perhaps one pragmatic approach that we have been trying to adopt more and more is not to do any vetting upfront. So let those companies introduce themselves to you. And if you come to an opportunity where you need or you want to do business with the company, then you can conduct your due diligence process. Then you can check the credentials, you do everything, but do not create barriers or gates up front, because this is disruptive. I don't think that this will add much value.
Now there's a question that kind of links to this one then. It was geared towards you, Alex, but I guess it applies to everybody. The question is, how do you determine what spend you had with existing diverse suppliers across the countries that you identified for first launch? So before you have the whole certification program in place, how do you basically identify the suppliers that you already have in your network that you're doing business with? So basically your baseline, how do you determine your baseline?
So look, this is a challenge, and the more globally you go, the more the challenge is a couple of things. First, we have data privacy. So to be able to go and ask the question, we have to engage heavily with our legal team. And as you all know, Europe is not US, Europe is not alike. I mean, I love what Mayank said. So when you go to data privacy and legal concern, that's a big thing. So work with your legal team to make sure you do the right thing. Also work with your HR team, because of course we're also driving ED&I internally. So very similar challenge. So normally you have very good practice with your HR team. And then comes also the beauty of having big, large supply base. We have 56,000 suppliers. We had to reach out to all of them to know who was diverse, because very often they're also the small one. You know, so you can't just do the typical, I go to 20% of my spend, I got my answer. So we work with someone called Integrity Next, which is a third-party platform to reach out to large group. Again, you have to do it in white language, white com, white legal. And then honestly, many people don't come back. And we don't come back because many of them don't know what you're asking for. I saw someone asking what's the right question. We can share that offline, but very important how you ask, because many people don't understand. Many people don't want to answer because they don't see the value or they don't want to disclose information, even if you're okay from a legal point of view. So third-party big platform is not enough. What we had to do then is to reach out. And I'm going to use some new third party that are having, you know, different way of validating, reaching out and find out. Because we're also tracking both certified and self-declare. So the self-declare you have to validate in order to be able to report externally. So long story short, it took us 6 months. So it's a long process. And the first time it's quite hard. The good news is that when you do it once, you have a good baseline that then you just need to continue to embed the new one coming. So I would also say first thing to do, lock your onboarding tools with your supplier, that when you get a new supplier coming on board, from day one, you ask, are you a diverse supplier? And then later on, you ask why, which percentage, blah, blah, but keep that at the beginning. Otherwise, it's complicated.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I was going to ask you, how do you identify then your suppliers when you onboard them as diverse, but you've answered that already. So.
Unless there are no other questions, Sonia, I would have maybe one and also in this relationship with the tools, and also Rod, I think this is your home turf as well, right? So I think without digitalization and making it visible, it's a hard and tough game. And you mentioned now Integrity Next is the one that you're using within Unilever. Are there maybe also others, also for those who are our participants today? Maybe if you have something to share where you get more transparency on your supplier base, where you made a good experience, maybe do so in the chat. And also if you have a question to address directly, raise your hand. We are happy to let you ask your question then also verbally. It doesn't need to be the chat. Maybe coming back to the tools question, anything else, Alex, that you're using, or Rod, that you can recommend? Because I think you have also some experience there.
Yeah, one company we partner with in the US is Supplier.io / CVM Solutions. They're one and the same now. They used to be 2 separate companies. And then also, really, that's more focused on North America, the US and Canada. And what we do when working with or advising companies that want to go global, one of the things that we do is partner with Mayank in MSD UK, GSDA, and really advise organizations to focus as they want to roll out beyond the US, because, you know, they have, you know, the credible organizations associated with GSDA to really focus on those 5 markets that roll into that, because that's where the data is most reliable. But Supplier.io is one. There's also another company, Tealbook, that's actually based in Canada, that provides a solution that helps gain more transparency.
Thanks, Rod.
There's a question here, hand raised in the audience, Astrid, by Jonathan Mayer. If you want to ask a question.
Yes, no, I just wanted to mention, I don't know if it's of interest, but there also does exist some coalitions who are now working on this tooling question, aware of the fact that a lot of companies and organizations don't really know how to develop inclusive sourcing programs. We work within a coalition called B4IG. We're working currently on a methodology which is really aimed at procurement teams to help them look at all the different organizational implications, because there are many. It's true, how to onboard your management, how to train the procurement teams, how to introduce metrics to be able to measure your progress, how to onboard suppliers. So just if this is of interest to others, just be aware that we do realize that there's also a gap in terms of how can you accompany organizations who are starting and be able to sort of help them through all the different aspects of how do you embed this within your procurement policy internally. And this is at least, I just wanted to mention this is some of the work we're doing under B4IG, and we should be coming out with that soon.
Very good. I do not really know if you put it already into the chat, but if not, please do so. Jonathan, I think this is also a very interesting one for the audience. Anybody else who wants to address a question to the panelists, or do we have another one in the chat, Sonia?
Yes, we have a couple more questions. There was one early on asking if there is any, I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but basically the spirit was, is there any effort on the European level to come to some sort of harmonized taxonomy of minority business definition?
Let me answer that. We just launched our European program, as I mentioned, and it's a 2-year pilot that we are running in 6 countries across Europe. And what we are doing is looking at seeking legal advice from senior law firms over there to have individual definitions for all those countries, and then start certification process. So that's what our intention is. There cannot be one uniform definition of who minorities are in Europe. Every country has different way of defining, and that's where the challenge is. And we will have by end of this year clear definition in all those 6 countries.
Okay. Very good.
Sylvia Lever was asking to share how questions are phrased around diversity in the suppliers questionnaire. So how can what's an example of a concise question, basically to ask a supplier, are you a diverse business or not? I don't know if anybody wants to share.
So we build that into our questionnaire. Unfortunately, the answer is not as easy because again, there are countries where you cannot ask this question. There are countries where you need to first make sure that the supplier is not a mandatory question to answer. In some countries, you can go and even ask which type of diversity group they are coming from. In other countries, you cannot do that, especially in countries where, for example, LGBTQI is still, death penalty or big risk. And that's also why I just want to bring the reason, on self-declare versus certify. I just want my procurement colleague to know, in many countries in the world, as Mayank said, you don't have certification that exists. So if I'm waiting certification to be available to start identifying them and working with them, it could take some time. And again, there are groups of people such as the LGBTQI, which it will be almost impossible in many countries to certify because there is no marriage or there is no document that will prove that. And it could be quite an uncomfortable conversation to really go into the detail of certifying. So as you go again global, be aware that some of maybe the way we develop program in South Africa or in North America will be complicated, and you need to find more different approach, like Mayank described, for example, for the control minority. That is already a good way to get some impact.
Very good. Mayank, there is one question in the chat, if you can share the 6 countries in Europe that are in focus.
Yeah, so I will put in the chat box also, but we are working in France, Germany, Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands, and Ireland.
Very good. Thanks, Mayank. And we have one hand raised from Kunal Jain. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. I have anyone in the panel, but mainly focus on Europe. Recently, European Commission has launched the CSDD, so Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence. I am going to details of it, but if someone can enlighten, is there a section of supplier diversity in the due diligence and how it is impacting to promote supplier diversity from the policy perspective?
Mayank, are you aware of the details of the supply chain due diligence regulation that is upcoming?
No, I don't have, but what I can do is if Kunal, you can drop an email, your email address, I will check what that and come back to you in a week's time.
Okay. I'm just going through it, so anyways, I will find out, but it will be good to exchange something.
Absolutely.
I have your email address, so I'll just drop an email to you. That's okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't have this transparency as well. So I'm just looking now at Alex or Jaime, but I think it's nothing that is.
I don't think it is included, but Mayank, you can find it. I don't think it's included. I know there is a lot on wages. I don't think supply diversity is part of the act so far.
Yeah, it says about the due diligence on the environment and wages, as you said, yes, on the way of living, but that also somehow can be linked to the supplier diversity, but I do not know, so that's why I'm just asking this question in an open forum.
Super, thanks for the question. Maybe I have another one because I see an interesting post also in the chat. So sorry for bringing you on stage, but maybe also on microphone at least. Marie Basso from the Business for Inclusive Growth. You commented on Jonathan that the tools that he was mentioning will soon be published on the Business for Inclusive Growth website. Maybe can you just quickly speak up and share a little bit more about this, what the tools are that you will launch there and the implications?
I can't, but maybe Jonathan, you want to jump in on this one? Otherwise, I'm happy to share a bit more.
Good. Then basically it was the one that you mentioned, Jonathan, right?
That's correct. Sorry if there was a misunderstanding. That's the same one. So the one I mentioned earlier under the Coalition Business for Inclusive Growth, we've been working on a methodology to how to help a company implement their inclusive sourcing strategy.
Okay, so
which will be going public very soon.
Cool. So thanks a lot for clarifying this. So then I think many of us are looking forward to this. And other questions, I see your hand still raised, Kunal, but I think this is maybe one that is still up.
I haven't seen any more questions in the chat. No.
Good. So then maybe we can even bring you some minutes back of the day, which we are happy to do so. But let me maybe close the meeting with two things. I saw that Sonia already posted in the chat that we recently launched a survey together with Gartner. And this service is obviously also about sustainable procurement and where we are. We would be very delighted if you take some minute of your day to answer to the survey. There's also a benefit for you. If you answer to the survey, you can choose from a resource library that Gartner provides there to topics that are related to sustainable procurement. So for example, a internal carbon pricing model, if you're interested in some aspects there or others. So please find the link to the Gartner survey, or maybe Sonia, if you have it available, post it again. This would be very nice if you take the time there. This is this, and then maybe some advertising for the session still to come. The next one will be about the future of responsible sourcing, collaboration and impact, which is a very nice one, including the ASD and the perspective on palm oil. Then we have why is sustainable supply chain and procurement education so key? I think, Sonia, this brings you back on stage. This is your...
But at 7 o'clock, not at 5 o'clock.
At 7 o'clock?
Yeah, my heart just skipped a beat when I saw that.
Okay, so I'm sorry, then it's most probably my mistake. 7 p.m. Universal Time, right? Universal Time?
6 p.m. Universal Time,
okay,
7 p.m.
Okay, now we mixed it all up. So 6, which brings you, let me look at my 1 hour.
In 1 hour.
before it starts. And we
2
have the
hours.
launch of the US chapter from SPP. Also there, a warm invitation to join. And travel and the fashion industry is on stage at 8 p.m. UTC. So if you have time still to spend, I think there's more interesting aspects and information to be shared. And for this, thanks for joining our session today. We will upload the recordings and also all the information to our spp.earth website. Thanks and have a lovely rest of the day. And thanks to the panelists as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great session. Great.